So your team doesn't want to speak up in meetings? Here are 5 techniques you can use to get better engagement from your team today. Just lead. Have you ever found that you just can't seem to get the buy-in that you desire from your team? That they often look bored and disinterested and they just want to get on with their day. Engaging a team in a meeting is not a skill set that's natural to many people. You might not be a natural born storyteller. You might not have the craziest mannerisms and you might not have the best jokes. So I'm going to give you simple techniques that anyone can use to engage your team better. And better than that, you can start using them today. The first tip is the hardest for everyone to master, but you need to master this before you move on. Mastering this skill will get better gains than anything else that you can do, and that is sit in the silence. This will turn your meeting from someone dictating at the front of the room to someone having a conversation with their team. Presentation to conversation. And there's science behind it. Studies show that when you're having a conversation with someone, the handoff between people is typically around 200 milliseconds. And once that gets to 4 seconds, it really becomes awkward for everyone in the room. Now here's the kicker. It takes 600 milliseconds for someone to think up a word, process it, and then bring it to their mouth to say it. So what all this means is that if you're not sitting in the silence, you're not providing your team opportunity to even think of anything to say. How are they going to engage? Their brains won't even activate into response mode in the time you give them if you're not sitting in that silence. It's only 4 seconds for it to be awkward. And you know that when you get to that 4-second mark, there's going to be someone in the room that just cannot handle it anymore, and they're going to respond and they're going to start that conversation and move it from presentation to conversation. This next tip is about your physical presence. And it's as simple as this. Step back. If you're in a meeting room, all this means is ensure you're in a position where you can see everyone's eyeballs and they can see yours. And when you're in presenting mode at the front of a room, in front of a crowd, ensure you step as far back as possible. What this means is everyone can see you and has a vantage point of you. And as the person leading the meeting, it means that you can see individuals and see their physical responses and start to approach them for joining in the conversation. And when someone starts speaking up to you, don't step into them. Don't step towards them. And this is for 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is that when you step towards them, they're going to be talking directly to you, and you've started a one-on-one conversation when you're in a group situation. And the closer you are to them, they're not going to project their voice very loud. And so the rest of the room is left out and they disengage from the meeting as soon as you step into someone to start having that conversation, because they'll drop their volume and you will drop your volume naturally. Step back, and if you can't hear them, ask them to speak up, and then the whole room is involved. Number 2, as soon as you step to someone at the side of the room, your shoulder and your back is to that part of the room, out the back. And that immediately disengages someone. That's your physical presence. You're not being open to everyone in the room. They'll disengage from the meeting, switch off, and they'll be waiting for their time to go and leave the room. So step back and invite anyone's comments in the room to be loud enough for everyone to hear. It's about this stage that someone will tell you that you need to start asking open questions to gather engagement from your team. And I want to pump the brakes on that. You need to get into the habit of just asking questions of your team to start. They don't necessarily need to be open questions. As a new leader, you don't want to be standing at the front of the room, spinning your wheels trying to think of open questions that you can ask your team when you aren't engaging with them fully. All you need to be at the front of the room is curious. Be curious about what they're saying, listen to what they're saying, and ask follow-up questions. If they're yes and no questions, they're yes and no questions. Get into the habit of asking questions. That initial engagement that you build with your team will get them used to answering questions in these meetings. Don't come into the room with all the answers. Now this might seem counterintuitive to many, particularly with my background in maintenance. You're expected to know everything that's going on with the plant that you're responsible for. This will truly level up your game when it comes to asking open questions. The next step from the previous tip. By not having the answers, what this means is that one, you're not brushing past someone because you already know what's going on in their hemisphere, so you don't need to ask them any questions. Bang, they're already not engaged. And two, when you don't know the full situation, you're naturally going to ask probing questions and you're going to dive in deeper. And it's going to naturally lend itself to open questions without you even trying. I had to do pre-start meetings with my supervisors, and the diversity of my team meant that I couldn't be over everything all at once. And what that meant was when we were having meetings, I was able to engage each individual in such a way that it provided value for the rest of the team and asked open questions so they engaged fully in my meetings. So the counter to all of this is having all of the answers. You'll come into a meeting and then because someone's told you that you need to engage better with your team or the meeting's only worth it if you get proper engagement, you're asking questions and you're pushing that envelope of asking open questions, but it's a fake engagement. Why are you having that meeting? And two, it's obvious that you're just putting on a show, and meetings aren't about putting on a show. You need to get value from them or you need to move on from them. Truly, be curious and be ignorant. You'll get incredible buy-in from your team. This next tip is very difficult to perform in a live and active meeting, in the spot, in the heat of the moment. And that is, don't linger. You can get overly intrigued by a certain scenario or a certain problem that's going on from some person's section of the meeting. And you can end up probing into that situation a bit too far, into a bit too much depth. Lingering, what that does is it automatically disengages everyone else in the meeting room that has nothing to do with that situation. Why do they need to be here for the conversation that you're having with person A? My rule of thumb is that if you've asked 3 questions to probe into that issue, you've asked too many questions. You've gone too far and you've lingered too long on that scenario. You need to put a pin in that situation and say that you'll come back to them after the meeting and get all the necessary parties together after the meeting to go into it in more depth, into the depth that it deserves. That way you can then move on from that situation and engage the full team in the rest of the meeting, and the meeting then becomes more efficient for everyone there involved. You want to be getting quality, value-adding engagement from the majority of your team and from every single member of the team over the course of several meetings. Keep pushing for more engagement from your team incrementally over each meeting, and find your own sweet spot. How much engagement is enough engagement for you and that particular meeting? And for pity's sake, don't use communication mnemonics. This is why.